I sat alone in the waiting room at UpMike when the doctor said my grandmother Ada hadn't survived surgery. I had worked as a hospice nurse for 9 years, but nothing prepared me for hearing that sentence. I called my parents 3 times while she was in surgery, and neither of them answered once. 18 minutes after my first call, my father finally texted, "You're already there." Will come once she's actually gone. Now she was gone, and I was staring at that message like it had frozen the blood in my hands. Out of habit, I took out my notebook and wrote everything down. The time, the doctor's words, my father's text. 9 years in hospice had trained me to document everything carefully, but I never imagined those notes would become evidence at 4:32 that afternoon. I had just finished my shift at Riverview Hospice when the hospital called me. The doctor sounded urgent and said my grandmother had arrived septic, needing immediate surgery with almost no chance. I called my father. No answer. I called my mother, Lena. No answer there either. Then I sent one message to the family group chat. Grandma is critical. She's in surgery. Come now. The message showed as read almost immediately, but neither of them replied with a single word. I grabbed my coat, rushed out, and drove 14 minutes to UpMike with my phone clenched in one hand. The screen stayed dark the entire drive except for my father's cold text about coming after she died at the front desk. A nurse handed me a visitor badge and gently asked whether other family members were coming for reasons I still can't explain. I lied and said they're on their way. I couldn't bear admitting that my parents cared so little they wouldn't come until death made it convenient. At 6:11 p.m., they wheeled my grandmother into surgery and said it might take between 2 and 4 hours. For the next 4 hours, I sent updates every 30 minutes. Still in surgery, no news yet, still waiting. Every one of those messages was read almost immediately, and every one of them went unanswered. A nurse asked again whether my family was close, and I lied again because the truth humiliated me. Eventually, I had to step into the hallway, pretending to get coffee just to breathe without crying. At 9:47, the operating room doors opened, and I knew before he spoke that she was gone. At 9:51 p.m., my grandmother went into cardiac arrest, and they couldn't bring her back. I went in to see her one last time, and her hands were still warm. I leaned down and whispered, "I'll protect you. I won't let them twist your story." Then I called my father again. He answered after 3 rings and said, "We'll handle arrangements tomorrow." He didn't ask whether I was okay. He didn't ask how she looked. He asked nothing when I asked why he hadn't come. His voice turned sharp and impatient almost immediately. "You deal with dying people every day," he said. "This shouldn't be a big deal for you." The call lasted 47 seconds, and I took a screenshot before my hands stopped shaking. When I called my mother, I could hear the television playing casually in the background. She was old, she said lightly. It's a relief she didn't even want to come see her. The next morning, my father called and told me to handle the funeral arrangements myself. "You're a nurse," he said. "You understand these things." I agreed because I was too angry to speak without screaming at the funeral home. The director gently asked whether my parents would be involved in planning anything. I forced a smile because there was no graceful way to explain what kind of people they were. Then he told me something unexpected. My grandmother had arranged most of her funeral 2 weeks earlier. She had also left 2 sealed envelopes, one for the priest at Stiti, Mary's church, and one for her lawyer. A chill went through me because it felt like she had already seen every part of this unfolding. When I went to her house to choose clothes for the service, I found an envelope on the kitchen table. It had my name written across the front and a date from 6 days before her surgery. "If I don't make it home, open this." Inside was a handwritten letter, copies of hospital records from 2020, and a USB drive labeled voicemail. She wrote that she had long stopped expecting my father to visit her when she was hospitalized in 2020 after her stroke. She spent 6 weeks in the hospital, and he visited exactly once. He stayed 15 minutes. And 12 of those minutes were spent asking whether she planned to sell her house. She had kept the visitation records. She had also kept bank statements showing my father had borrowed a total of $4,800 and never repaid her. The USB drive contained voicemail after voicemail of him asking for money and urging her to sell. Not one recording asked how she felt. Not one asked whether she was afraid or in pain. I sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by silence, and for the first time I completely lost control. I screamed until my throat hurt, then opened my laptop and created a folder called Evidence. I organized everything into it. Screenshots, recordings, visitation logs, hospital records, and bank statements. I knew she hadn't left these things behind for revenge. She had left them so the truth couldn't be buried beside her. On January 23rd, more than 60 people gathered at St. Mary's Church for my grandmother's funeral. My parents arrived just before the service began, beautifully dressed and wearing their grief-like costume jewelry. After the eulogy, the priest took out a red wax-sealed envelope and looked directly at me. He said my grandmother had left instructions 6 days earlier. If Thomas is present, do not read this aloud. Give it to Isabella. My father's face drained of color. He stood up and tried to grab the envelope from the priest. The priest stopped him, and I took the envelope into the restroom to open it privately. Inside was another letter written in my grandmother's careful hand. She wrote that she had updated her will and left her house and all assets to me. She said I was the only one who had stayed by her side when it mattered. She also wrote that if my father tried contesting the will, I should present everything she had left behind. She had known he would try. At the family gathering after the funeral, I stood in front of everyone and read her letter aloud. Then I showed them everything: the unpaid debts, the visitation records, the voicemails, and his text message. I told them how he hadn't come during surgery and how my mother called death a relief. My father started shaking with rage and shouted that she hadn't been of sound mind. I looked at him and said calmly that she had been perfectly clear and fully prepared. Then he stormed out, and my mother followed him without saying a single word. 3 days later, my grandmother's lawyer called and said she had left one more envelope for me. It was to be delivered 2 weeks after the funeral. Inside was a note and another USB drive. Watch the video. Then decide what to do next. The video had been recorded on January 8th in my grandmother's own living room. She sat calmly in her chair and described my father's years of greed, neglect, and emotional abandonment. Then she revealed she had installed a hidden camera in that living room, following her instructions. I logged into the cloud account and found footage from December 19th, 2024. My parents were sitting in her house discussing how they would sell it after she died. They talked about using the money to travel across Europe once everything was finished. My father laughed and said I could handle the funeral because she's a nurse. This is her job. My mother didn't object. She only worried about whether anyone would find out what they said. The lawyer told me my grandmother had updated her will again on January 11th, disinheriting my father completely. A priest and a doctor had both witnessed it and confirmed she was of sound mind on February 3rd. My father filed a lawsuit claiming I had coerced her and manipulated the will. In court, our lawyer presented everything: witness testimony, bank records, voicemails, camera footage, and the notarized will. Then the notary testified that my father had asked her to retroactively validate a forged version. That forged will would have split the property between him and me, and she had refused. On April 10th, the judge dismissed the lawsuit and said my grandmother's intentions were unmistakably clear. The evidence was overwhelming. The case had no merit after that. My father disappeared 2 months later. My mother called me crying and said she was divorcing him. She admitted her greed, her cowardice, and her silence, then asked whether I could forgive her. I told her I needed time because some damage doesn't disappear just because someone finally tells the truth on February 14th, 2026. I officially moved into my grandmother's house and planted her favorite white roses inside the living room. I built a memory wall filled with photographs from every stage of her life. At the center, I placed her end of life directive inside a simple wooden frame. Below it, I engraved one sentence: Dignity at the end of life is earned, not inherited. With the inheritance she left me, I founded the Ada Dignity Fund in her memory. The fund helps elderly people abandoned or exploited by family members through legal support and emergency assistance in 6 months. We helped 41 people every time we helped someone reclaim their dignity. I felt like I could see her smiling again. I still work at Riverview Hospice, but now I say one thing to neglected elderly patients whenever I can: don't endure in silence. Don't wait for someone else to care. Fight for your dignity. My grandmother gave me justice in her own way, but more than that, she gave me strength, and I'll carry that strength forward so more people understand one simple truth: care is not charity. It is responsibility. Dignity is not compromise. It is a right.